How you doing there? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Kuf Beis, Daf 102 of Masechta BavaMetzia. Wow. Okay. Here's the thing. Cheved, listen up. Here's the thing with Daf Kuf Beis. The place where there's a place to stop at the top of Kuf Gimel Amud Aleph. But it just feels like we could just push a little bit further and get to the Mishnah in the middle of Kuf Gimel Amud Aleph. And then it feels like once we're there, we could just push and get to the end of the 8th parak of Masechta BavaMetzia. And I'm really, really tempted to do that. I think I'm going to do that. Basically means that we're learning a daf and a half, almost like 2 daf argue. No, not 2 daf. No, like a daf in it. Well, anyways, I don't know. Yeah, we got a bunch to do today, so it might be a long one, but even if I do that, which I think I'm planning to do that, the cool thing is that we're going to finish the 8th parak of Masechta BavaMetzia, which means that we're then up to the 9th parak, which is incredible because the 10th parak of BavaMetzia, the 10th and final parak of BavaMetzia, is only just a few daf. So this is really the last grand stand over here in BavaMetzia, which is incredible. All right, so I think that's what we're going to do. I think we're going to push until the end of the 8th parak of Masechta BavaMetzia today. We are going to start on Daf Kuf Aleph Amud Beis, which means that we're going to start on Daf Kuf Aleph Amud Beis today, about 10 or 15 lines from the bottom, and push all the way till about 5-6 lines from the bottom of Kuf Gimel Amud Aleph. So Kuf Aleph Amud Beis to Kuf Gimel Amud Aleph, we got a lot to do, but it's going to be great. Says the Mishnah, Hamasker Bayis LaChavero. Okay, so if Shimon is renting out his house to Reuven, Hamasker Chayev. So Shimon, the landlord, is responsible B'delis, to provide a door, B'neger, to provide a bolt, Uvemanul, and a lock, Uvechol Shemaise Umin, and anything that requires a professional. Aval Davar she'eino Maise Umin, but something that does not require a professional, Hasocher Oseu. So then the renter, the tenant, is responsible. Hazevel shel ba'al habayis, the manure belongs to the landlord. The Gemara is going to get into this. And in terms of whatever kind of compost, whatever kind of fertilizer is available to the tenant, it's only what comes from the oven and the stove. I guess things that can be, maybe like my neighbor uses to water the plants with. Maybe she uses stuff that comes from the stove and the oven. Okay. It says the Gemara Tanur, one of the rabbis taught. Hamasker Bayis LaChavero. Okay, so if Shimon is renting out his house to Reuven, Masker Chayv LaHabed Lo Dlosis. Okay, so Shimon the landlord needs to provide doors, Liftoach Lo Chlonis, to open up windows to provide windows, Lechazik Lo Tikra, to make sure the ceiling is supported, the roof is supported, Lismoch Lo Korah, if any beams need supporting, support those. V'socher Chayev Lasos Lo Sulam, and the tenant is responsible if he needs a ladder, so he's responsible for the ladder. Lasos Lo Maike, if he needs to put a fence around the roof, he puts a fence around the roof. Lasos Lo Marzev, or to make a gora for the roof. Latiach es gago, or to put plaster or something on the roof. Okay, these are things that I guess these are considered smaller things that the tenant would be responsible for. But Rav Sheshes asked him, Sheshes, mezuzah al mi? Whose responsibility is it to provide a mezuzah? Okay, Reuven rents a house from Shimon. Who needs to install a mezuzah? So, but mezuzah al mi, mezuzah. What do you mean? Why are you asking about a mezuzah? Mezuzah chavas adari. Misharsha says that the mezuzah is the responsibility of the tenant. So there's your answer. What's the question? Mishasha, we know. Mishasha says mezuzah chovas hadar. So ela mikom mezuzah almi. Who's responsible to make the place where the mezuzah goes? That meaning, if if it's a stone wall, and the mezuzah needs to go in the stone wall, who's got to dig that? Who's got to create that space in the wall, in the doorpost? Amar lu Rav Sheshes Tnisua. Rav Sheshes says, well, we learned in this Mishnah that we just learned, look, if it's something that doesn't require a professional, so the tenant, it's upon the tenant to take care of it. And also putting up a mezuzah lav ma'isa umanu doesn't require a professional per se. Efshir hu begufta dikanyo. Look, you don't need to etch out a place in the wall for the mezuzah. You can also just take some kind of a tube and tape it up to the wall, right? Some people even just take the scroll and tape it to the wall. That's a mezuzah. You don't need any fancy setup, installation for the mezuzah. You can even just put it up against the wall, and that would be enough. And the tenant can do that. Shimon rents out his house to Reuven. Ala socher lasos lo mezuzah. It is the tenant's responsibility to put up a mezuzah. Ukshu yotze, when the tenant what's the word I'm thinking of? When the tenant not evacuate, when the tenant vacates the premises. I feel like I don't search for words as much as I used to. I used to search around for words a lot. Whatever. When the tenant vacates the premises, lo yitlena biyado v'yetze, he shouldn't take the mezuzah with him. He should leave it. Uminachri notla biyado. But if he's renting from a nachri, so then when he leaves the rental, when he leaves the apartment, he does take the mezuzah with him. Umaise notla biyado v'yotze. Umaise be'echad, there was a maise with the fellow shenotla biyado, that he took the mezuzah with him v'yotze, and he left. V'kaver ishto shnei vanov and nebuch. He buried his wife and 2 kids. They died. Maise Lister, why are you bringing a maise that contradicts what we just said? We just said that if you're renting from a nachri, you do take the mezuzah with you. And then you just gave us a maise about somebody who took his mezuzah, and nebuch, there was tragedies in the family. So Rav Sheshes Haresh. Rav Sheshes says, no, the maise is not supporting by the nachri, it's supporting by a yid. If Shimon rents his house to Reuven, and Reuven puts up a mezuzah when he leaves, he should leave the mezuzah there. There was a ma'aseh, a person left and took his mezuzahs, and nebuch, there were tragedies in his family. Said the Mishnah, Zevel shel Bal Habayis, that the manure belongs to Shimon, to the Bal Habayis. Ve'ein la socher ella, and what Reuven is entitled to is min elayotze min atonur min akrayim bavad, only that which comes from the oven or from the stove that can be used, I guess, I don't know, things that come from the ash, I'm not a farmer, but things coming from the oven that make fertilizer. Okay, what do you want me to tell you? So the socher can have those. B'mai oskinon. Okay, what's the dilio? What are we talking about that the manure goes to Shimon? B'maiskim, what are we talking about? Look, if we're talking about in a chotzer that was rented to the renter, to Reuven, and we're talking about Reuven's cows, well, amai shabal abayis. Why? I mean, if it's the chotzer that Reuven is renting and it's his cows, the manure should be his to use, not the Baal Habayis. And if we're talking about a courtyard that was not rented to Reuven, and we're talking about Shimon's animals, well then obviously if it's Shimon's courtyard that was not rented to Reuven, and we're talking about Shimon's animals, obviously the manure goes to Shimon. So, lo tzricha b'chotzer demaskir v'torei das u'me'amah. Well, it's talking about the courtyard of of Shimon that was not it's Shimon's chotzer that was not rented out to Reuven, and it's talking about animals. They're not Shimon's animals. They're just animals that roamed into the chotzer and created manure there. So l'tzricha b'chotzer demaskir v'tor da'asumei alma kamuba. All right, fine. Misyele l'Reb Yosef b'Bchinan, and this supports Reb Yosef b'Bchinan. Dam Reb Yosef b'Bchinan chatzeru shel adam kona lo shelo midaito. So the fact that we're saying that these animals come in, the fact that we're saying that these animals come into to Shimon's courtyard and they produce manure and Shimon can keep it, is because things that come into his courtyard belong to him. Okay, and therefore the manure belongs to him. Meisvei, we're going to bring a series of kashas on Rabbi Yosef bar Chanina, right? So Rabbi Yosef bar Chanina had said that a person's courtyard acquires things for him even without his knowledge. So Meisvei, we have a kasha. Im Omar kol metzios sheyavo lesocho hayom tikna li chatzerai. If a person says anything that may end up coming into my courtyard today belongs to me, lo yomar klum, what he said is irrelevant. And if Rabbi Yosef bar Chanina is correct that a person's chotzer is kone, so amai lo. Amai lo amar klum. So why doesn't that work? Right? A guy says anything that may end up in my courtyard today belongs to me. We say lo amar klum, it's irrelevant. But it sounds like according to Rabbi Yosef bar Chanina, anything that ends up in his courtyard should belong to him. So achav ma'eskinon b'chotzer she'eina mishtameres. Well, that's talking about in a chotzer that was not guarded. Maybe it didn't have walls; it wasn't guarded, and therefore, because it wasn't guarded, so the things that end up in there do not automatically belong to him. But if it was a guarded chotzer, a fenced-off chotzer, well, then anything that ended up in there would belong to him, right? His chotzer would be kone. If that's the case, that we're talking about where it's not guarded, if we go weiter in that brayso, so what does it say? Yotza lo shem metzia ba'ir. If word got out that some objects, some items ended up on his field, so dvarav kayamin, well then they belong to him, right? If yotza lo shem ba'ir, if like people are talking about it, that there are items that turned up on his property, well then they belong to him. If we're talking about a chotzer that is not guarded, well then kiyotzel l'shem metzia ba'ir mayave. So if we're talking about a chotzer that is not guarded, then I don't care if like people are talking about it or not. If it's not guarded, well then it's not kone. So well, actually, the interesting thing is that once people are talking about it and saying that, oh yeah, so and stuff, I don't know, what does Rashi say? Rashi says, that an injured deer collapsed on his property, or the river overflowed and now there's a bunch of fish on his property, right? Meaning because the people are talking about that, so then so bedile, right? People are going to kind of like leave it for him, and therefore and therefore it's considered like it is guarded. So that is why his chotzer would be kona, because it actually would be then considered like a chotzer mishtameres. Okay, so fertilizer that comes from the oven or from the stove, vakolate min ha'avir, or fertilizer that comes from the air. So if I understand correctly, it sounds like you have an animal, and the animal produces manure, and that manure plops out of his, what's the best way to say this? What's like the best way? Anus? Do I say that? Do I have permission to say anus? Wow. Oh my, last 2 days we've been having to discuss these things. So Zevel Yotze Mina Ovir, where am I? So Mina Tana Mina Kiraim, Vakol Mina Ovir. So it sounds like Be'etzim, what's going on is that, Ruvain, I guess, has a cow, and the cow is going to produce manure, and he puts a bucket under the cow's anus, and the manure just goes into the bucket. Very beautiful, and it belongs to Ruvain. Hareyu Shalo, so it belongs to Ruvain. V'shebarefetz v'shebachotzer, any manure that is in the barn or in the courtyard, shel balabayis, belongs to Shimon. Now, I don't understand. If what Rabbi Yosef B'Chinina is saying is correct, that anything in one's chotzer belongs to him, right? A person's chotzer is konos. Now, we had just said that any manure in Shimon's chotzer, or in his barn, right? Anything in his chotzer belongs to Shimon, and yet we're saying that this ovir, right? What do we say? We said about kolit mina ovir, that if Ruvain catches this manure in his bucket from the cow's anus, so then it belongs to Ruvain. But the Omar Chatzer Shel Adam Konelo Shalom Midaito. But if Rabbi Yosef B'Chinina is correct that a person's chotzer is kona even Shalom Midaito, so kolet me'aver amai, why does this manure that's kolet me'aver go to Ruvain? Hareyu Shalo Avir Chatzeru. It should belong to Shimon because it's the Avir, it's the heir of his chotzer. Amar Abai says, Abai b'mad b'kli b'shulei pare. Givaldig. So that's a great kasha, right? So the kasha is, if we say that Rabbi Yosef B'Chinina is correct, that a person's chotzer is kona memele, well then this manure that is traveling through the ether, that is traveling through the air, should belong to Shimon as well, because the heir of his chotzer should be like his chotzer. Why does it belong to Ruvain? The reason why it belongs to Ruvain is because, says Abaye, b'mad b'kli b'shulei para. Well, Ruvain put this bucket right up against the cow's anus, so that the manure went straight into the bucket and was never in the air of the chotzer. How are you enjoying this Gemara? Rava Amr says, Rava, Avir she'ein sof lanuach lav kimunach dami. Says Rava, well, it's not really considered the air of the chotzer since it's not destined to land in the chotzer, right? It's going to land in the bucket. It's never going to, so even if it wasn't all up against, right under the anus, but it was going to travel through the air to land in the bucket. At the end of the day, it was going to land in the bucket, not into the chotzer. Therefore, Shimon's chotzer is not kona, it belongs to Reuven. Umi pshita le l'Rava. Is it so obvious to Rava that something that is not destined to land in a domain is not considered like it's in that domain? Is it so obvious to Rava that since it's going to land in the bucket and not in the chotzer, it is not considered like it's in the chotzer? But v'ha mi boile, that was Rava Taka had the kasha. The Rava asked, Zorak arniki b'pesach zeh v'yotzosu b'pesach zeh. What happens if a person is mafkir his wallet and he throws it through one door and out the other door? So it goes through a house but doesn't land in the house. So mau arvish in sofelanuach kimunach dami olav kimunach dami. Do we say that the airspace that it travels through but ultimately is not going to land in, do we consider like it did land in that space or not? So we see Taka as a kasha, that even though it doesn't land in that space, but since it's in the airspace, it's a kasha if it's considered like it did land in that space. So asim lo mifsak v'lo midei acha mifsak kli. Yeah, but there's a difference with the wallet. It could have landed in the house if gravity forced it down, it would have landed in the house. Here, gravity is forcing it down, and it's going to land in the bucket. It never has any chance of landing in the chotzer, which is why Rava says, since it's destined to land in the bucket, it is not considered like it is in the courtyard. Okay, we said that any manure that is in the barn or is in the courtyard belongs to Shimon. Tarte, why do we need both of these examples? Why do we need the example of the barn and the courtyard? Is one not enough? So Abaye says, Abaye ochi ka'amar, this is what it's saying, v'shebarefes shebechotzer. Right, meaning initially we had thought that what it means is that any manure in the barn that was not rented to him, or in the chotzer that was not rented to him, would belong to Shimon. But now what we're saying is no. What it means is that we're talking about a chotzer that was rented to Reuven. But in the chotzer there is a barn. And what we're saying is that the manure in the barn, however, is off limits. Again, Omer Abai says, this is what it's saying, that if Reuven rents a courtyard from Shimon, and in the courtyard there is a barn, any manure in the barn belongs to Shimon, not to Reuven. Rav Ashi says, Rav Ashi also merits that says, Hamaskir chatzero stam lohiskir refes sheba. So we see from here that a person who rents out his courtyard, so by default, it does not include the barn. Now we're going to get to this interesting Gemara about shiluach hakain. When you have like a bird and you have the eggs and you have to send away the bird in order to right before you could take the eggs. So Mesa, we have a kasha and Rabbi Yosef Bar Chanina. What's the kasha? Yone shovach v'yone aliyah. Doves of a dovecote and doves of a attic, of a loft. Now these are doves that like the let's just call him Shimon, the person who owns like the dovecotes, and it's in his property, it's in his chotzer. He doesn't feed them. They go out and find their own food, but they come back to this shovach or to this aliyah. Chayavos b'shiluach. So shiluach hakein applies. Now the thing with shiluach hakein, it says ki yikare kan tzipah lifnei. It has to happen, right? It can't be like your pet bird. It's not talking about where you are responsible for that bird. It's talking about just randomly you find a nest, and in the nest there are eggs, and there's a mother bird. So that is where shiluach hakein applies. So now where are we? So in shovach v'yonei aliyah chayavos b'shiluach. Okay, so the mitzvah of shiluach hakein applies to them. So even though yes, they kind of come back to this person's property, to his dovecotes, to his loft, but they go out and they fend for themselves. They find their own food. So therefore, shiluach hakein would apply. V'asuris be'gezel m'pnei darkei shalom, and you're not allowed to steal these birds only because of darkei shalom, out of just not because it's actual theft, but because it's not nice. Because we want to be peaceful people, so therefore don't steal them. Okay. But now, if Rabbi Yosef Bar Chanina is correct that a person's chotzer is koneh, chatzer shalom koneh lo shalom idaito krikan ki yikari pradin mezuman. Well, if that's the case, well then these birds who are in the dovecotes or the loft that are in this person's chotzer, well then he should be koneh them. They should belong to him, and therefore they would be considered like they're his and not sort of random birds from the wild. Right? It's ki yikari. Right? If it so happens that you chance upon a nest, right, a bird's nest, pradla mezuman, to the exclusion of one that was already prepared. And if we're saying that a person's chotzer is koneh memele, so then these birds should belong to him, to the owner of the chotzer, and shiluach hakein should be irrelevant. Amar Rava should not be applicable. Amar Rava says, Rava beya B'yetzias ruba hu the ichayev lo b'shiluach hakein or b'shiluach. Rava says, well, here is the thing. Things kick in at different times. At what point does shiluach hakein, or does the mitzvah of shiluach hakein, is it triggered? Does it kick in? Once the majority of the egg has come out of the bird, right? Once the egg is mostly out, so at that point the person is already chayiv. There's a mitzvah of shiluach hakein. But in terms of his chotzer being koneh, umikna lo kanya adenafla lechatzero, in terms of his chotzer being koneh, which would then deflect, right? Would then, I'm like forgetting a million words today, right? Once it then goes into his chotzer, in which case it would belong to him, and therefore there would no longer be a mitzvah of shiluach hakein because it has to happen to you and not one that belongs to you. Right? So a mikno lakanya, it doesn't belong to him ad nafal chatzer until it falls into his chatzer, at which point, like Rabbi Yosef Bar Chanina says, that it would belong to him. So when we say that there's a mitzvah of shiluach hakein, mikame de tipo lachatzer, we're talking about before it falls in to his chatzer, so it isn't actually his yet, but it's already chayiv in shiluach hakein because the majority of the egg has come out. Well, if it hasn't fallen into his chatzer yet, well then why do we say that there is an issue of theft? Iman. Well, the issue of theft is for the mother, not for the egg per se. Or we could say it is talking about the eggs. But once the egg is a majority of the way out, he's already thinking about it, right? We said that there's an issue of theft only because of darkei shalom, because it's not nice. And once already the egg has come out mostly, so while, he might not technically own it yet, but he's already planning on it. So therefore, if you steal it, there's an issue of theft because of darkei shalom. But now that we know the opinion of Rav Yehuda Amarav, who says, Osur lezakis bebeitzim, kol zman she'eim rovetzes aleim, that you have no right to the you have no right to these eggs so long as the mother is sitting on them. Shenemar, as the pasuk says, Shaleach teshalach es ha'eim v'hoder es ha'bonim tikach lach. It says you have to first send away the mother bird. Once you send away the mother bird, only at that point can you take the eggs. So that being the case, that even be'etzim, once the eggs are in the courtyard, they still don't belong to the owner of the courtyard so long as the mother is sitting on them. Well then, afilu tema denafla l'chaser, you can even say that the eggs are in his courtyard, but still, even though yes, in principle, Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina has this opinion that a person's chotzer is koneh for him, but in this particular case, when it comes to shiluach hakein and a mother with the eggs, so long as she's sitting on them, you don't yet have a right to them. So kol heicha deiu matzi zachi le chatzer zachi le. So long as he would have a right to them, so does his chatzer give him a right to them. But v'chol heicha dei lo matzi zachi le. But in a scenario where where he can not take the eggs because she's sitting on them, well then his chatzer also would not be koneh them for him either. So so that is what we are talking about. And that's why there's this mitzvah of shiluach hakein, and we don't consider it to be his, because he doesn't actually have a right to them so long as the mother is sitting on them. If that's the case, but the Gemara says, but if that's the case, then I don't really understand why we say that it's asur because of theft, only out of concern for darkei shalom, for being peaceful. It's not actual theft, but the issue of theft is only because of darkei shalom. But I don't understand. If the thief sent away the bird, well then it's actual theft. It's not just darkei shalom theft, it's actual theft, because you sent away the bird, at which point the courtyard owner becomes the owner of the eggs, because the mother's gone and now his courtyard is koneh. So then he's an actual thief, whoever's stealing it. He's not just a darkei shalom thief. Idelo shalcha, and if he didn't send away the bird, well then the issue isn't theft. Habai shalucha. The issue is he's violating shiluach hakein. So it's not asur mipnei gezela, it's asur mipnei shiluach hakein. B'ka'in delav bar shiluach hu. Well, we're talking about, who's this thief? We're talking about a minor. Ka'in by darkei shalomu, but if we're talking about a minor who doesn't have the mitzvah of shiluach hakein, but does a minor have the mitzvah of darkei shalom? So this is what it's saying: Aviv shel ka'in chayiv la'achzir lo mipnei darkei shalom. That if a minor steals it, the minor's father would have to return the eggs to the owner of the chotzer out of darkei shalom for being peaceful. Okay, well that was the first Mishnah of today's daf. I think we're actually making decent time. We still have a lot more that I want to do, but I think we should be all right. Even by doing sort of a daf and a half, I think we should be okay with times. I don't think it's going to be extremely long. Says the Mishnah, Maskir Bayis Lachaveru Lishana. Okay, so if Shimon rents his house to Ruvain for 1 year, Nis'abra Shana, if it ends up being a leap year, well, the condition, the rental is for a year, and if it's a leap year, well, then the tenant wins. Nis'abra L'socher, right? The tenant gets an extra month in that case, right? The rental was for a year, whether it's a 12-month year, a 13-month year, right? If they ended up making a last-minute 13-month year, well, the tenant gets it for an extra month. Hiskir lo lechodashim. If, however, Shimon rented it to Ruvain for 12 months, well then nisab rashon and nisab lemaskir. Well, if it ends up being a 13-month year, well, Ruvain doesn't have the rental for that 13th month because he only rented it for 12 months. Maise b'tzipor be'echad shesocher merchotz mechaveru b'shneim aser zav l'shana medinar zav l'chodesh. So it was a maise in the town of Tzipori in Eretz Yisrael in the north. Be'echad shesocher merchotz mechaveru, that somebody Ruvain rented a bathhouse from Shimon b'shneim aser zav l'shana for 12 golden dinars for the year. Medinar zav l'chodesh, which is one golden dinar per month. And the Maisa came before Reb Shimon ben Gamliel and Reb Yossi, that they should divide that 13th month. What's the deal? We're bringing a Maisa that seems to be contradicting what we said right in the ratio of the Mishnah. We're talking about, if it's for a year, well then the tenant gets the 13th month. If it's monthly, well then the tenant doesn't get the 13th month, and then we bring a maisa where they say split the 13th month. Well, the ratio was pretty objective, was pretty definitive. Either the tenant is going to get it, or the balabais is going to get it. And then we bring a proof, a maisa, which probably brings to support some the Mishnah, and yet it's doing the opposite. It's saying they split it. The ratio is not talking about splitting. Either the tenant gets it or the balabais gets it. And here the anecdote, because usually when we bring a maisa, the point is like, this is halacha l'maisa. Look, we might be talking about this halacha, that halacha, but if we could bring a proof from an actual occurrence that happened, well, that's a pretty stark proof that this is what we do. And yet, it's not like what the Mishnah was saying. So you have to read into it, and this is how to read the Mishnah. However, if the arrangement was that the rental was 12 golden dinars for the year, dinar zav lachodesh, 1 golden dinar per month, so now you have kind of two things operating here, right? Initially he said 12 golden dinars for the year, but then he says 1 golden dinar per month. If you go based on 12 dinars per year, well then that should be regardless of if it's a leap year or not. But if you go by 1 golden dinar per month, well then it's going to be 1 golden dinar for that 13th month. So we're not sure, do you go based on Tvos Lashon Rishon or Tvos Lashon Achron? Do you go based on the first phrase, which is the first arrangement, which is the first thing stipulated, which is based on the year, or the second thing stipulated, which is based on monthly? So Maisa Nami, B'Sipori, there was Taka A, Maisa like this, in Sipori, Bechot Shesocher Merchotz Mechaveru, that Reuven had rented a bathhouse from Shimon, B'Shnim Oser Zuvim Lashona, for 12 golden coins for the year, Midinar Zav Lachodesh, 1 golden dinar for the month, of a Maisa Lefnei Reb Shimon ben Gamliel, Lefnei Reb Yossi, and the Maisa came for Reb Shimon ben Gamliel and Reb Yossi, V'amru Yachlokus Chodesh HaIbor, that they should split the 13th month, since you can kind of we're kind of not sure, right? Do you go based on the year, in which case the tenant gets it for free? The 13th month, does it go based on the month, in which case the tenant has to pay for the 13th month? They say split it. Okay. Omar Rav, says Rav, if I was there, hivna le kule lemaskir, I would have given it all to the Balabais, to Shimon. Because Rav says, let's go back to it for a second. So what? So what are you teaching us? What's the point that Rav says Tvos Lashon Achron? We already know this. So Rav's opinion is Tvos Lashon Achron. Rav's opinion is that you go based on the second thing that he said. So therefore, says Rav, if I was there, I would not have said that they split the 13th month. I would have said that the tenant, that Ruvain, must pay Shimon a golden dinar for the 13th month. Because what was the arrangement? He said 12 golden dinars for the year, 1 golden dinar per month. And Tvos Lashon Achron, we go based on the last thing that he said. The last thing that he said was 1 golden dinar per month. And therefore, if it's 13 months, well, the 13th month is like the others, and it's going to be 1 golden dinar for that month. So again, Omer Rav says, Rabbi Avoy, also, if I was there, I would not have said that they split the 13th month. I would have said that Ruvain needs to pay Shimon a golden dinar for that 13th month, just like for every other month. Because that was what he had said, fine. That was the second thing that he had said. But first he had said 12 golden dinars for the year, but then he had said 1 golden dinar per month. My kamash malon tvos loshin achrin. But now, so what's the big chiddush over here? That Rav says tvos loshin achrin? I already know that. Ha'amar Rav chadazimna. We already know Rav says that elsewhere. The Amar Ravuna, Ami be Rav, astira mea ma'e, astira. That if a person walks into a store, Reuven walks into the store, and Shimon, he says, okay, Shimon, how much for this? And Shimon says, oh, this? It costs, what did we say? Astira mea ma'e. So now, okay, so we're talking about here, without going into all the calculations, we already know the calculations, right? 8 prutas in a isser, 2 issers in a pundion, 2 pundion in a ma'a, 6 ma'a in a dinar, 4 dinar in a seller. Now the thing is, there's 2 kinds of sellers. There's I guess we are getting into it, but quickly. I don't want to get bogged down here because I want to keep moving. There's 2 types of sellers. There's seller medina and there's seller tsuri. When we talk about a seller, which is 4 dinars, that is a seller tsuri. However, there's also something called a seller medina, which is 1/8 of a seller tsuri, and that's be'etzim half of a dinar. So therefore, when we're talking about this istira is a tzela medina, which is half of a dinar. And when we're saying mea ma'e, we're talking about 100 prutas. So if we do the calculations, 8 prutas in a isser, 2 issers in a pundion. So now we're up to 16 prutas, 2 pundions in a ma'a. So now we're up to 13 prutas, and we're saying 6 ma'a in a dinar, but we're saying that a sela medina is half of a dinar, so that's 3 ma'as. So we're talking about 32 prutas times 3, which is 96. Okay, so we're talking about right, as opposed to if we're talking about silver ma'as. Well, silver ma'as, there are 6 ma'as in a dinar, 4 dinars in a sela. So if we're talking about a sela tsuri and silver ma'as, well, there would only be 24 ma'as in a sela tsuri, but we're talking about 100, so therefore it makes more sense to say we're talking about prutas and 96 prutas to a sela medina. No, yes. Okay, fine. Now that we did the math quickly, sorry, Mom, 1 sec. Now we did that kind of quick math just to kind of, wait 1 second. Sorry, Mom, again. Man, my nose is like all itchy and stuff. Okay, I gotta get it all scratch and stuff to get it to stop bothering me for a while. I was talking to my neighbor today. She was talking about the noise. Oh gosh, 1 second. Yeah, she was talking about the noise. The people were very loud last night. I woke up. So I told her about my noise canceling headphones, how it changed my life, and how I just kind of, yes, so she was saying that there was a lot of noise this morning at midnight, 2 a.m. I said, yeah, I was awake already at 2 a.m, and I had to put in my noise canceling headphones because the people were very loud. Why am I saying this? I don't remember. Where am I? So Where am I? I want to go weiter. So the point is that if Shimon says, yeah, that thing costs a Sela Medina, and then he says 100 prutas, so we say it's 100 prutas. Wow, okay, fine. Where am I? Okay. The Amr Vuna Marab, the Amri Bey Rab Istira Me'amai. So if Shimon said this thing, what is it? This, we're talking about this, right? Meaning, Reuben goes into Shimon's story, says, how much for this? And Shimon says, this is an Istira, which is a Sela Medina. He says it's an Istira. Me'amai, it's 100 Ma'a. It's 100 prutas. So now an Istira is 96 prutas. Sela Medina is 96 prutas, but then he says 100 prutas. So me'amai, so you know how much it costs? 100 prutas, whatever he said second. Me'amai, Istira, if he first said 100 prutas and then he said an Istira, what it costs is an Istira. So we see, all of that is to say that according to Rav, we say Tvos Lashon Achron. So what is the Chiddush? The same thing applies here. When he says 12 golden dinars for the year, 13, right, 1 golden dinar per month. So of course it's 1 golden dinar per month, and therefore Reuven has to pay Shimon a golden dinar for the 13th month. So we already know that would be Rav's opinion. Well, the thing is, from the pruta dinar thing, seller thing, I would think Parusha Kamifarish. I might think that, well, it was just an explanation. It's not like he said two things and we go based on the second one. No, he's saying in Istira, and then he's explaining what he means by that is 100, prutas. So Kamash Milan. So what Rav is teaching is that no, actually the halacha is that no, we don't just say that it's an explanation. We're actually saying Tvos Lashon Achron, that Rav's opinion is that we go based on what he says second, and therefore here by the leap year and the rent. So we're talking about, according to Rav, Reuven would be responsible to pay Shimon 1 golden dinar for that 13th month. Ushmuel Amar, and Shmuel says, "B'ba be'emtza chodesh askinan." So Shmuel explains that when Rabbi Shimon Gamliel and Rabbi Yossi say that Reuven and Shimon need to split the 13th month, it's talking about where Shimon wakes up halfway through the 13th month and says, "Wait a second, does Reuven really think that he's going to get the 13th month for free?" So they go to Bezdin. And Shimon saying, look, yeah, Reuven has to pay me for the 13th month. Reuven says, I don't have to pay for the 13th month. It's 12 for the year. So now the thing is, he's already been there for half of the month already. So he basically say, keep everything on their chazaka. Shimon's chazaka is that it's his property. Reuven's chazaka is that it's his money. So now we're halfway through the month. Reuven hasn't yet paid Shimon. The truth is, Reuven doesn't actually owe Shimon until the end of the month anyways, right? Because his chirus is only at the end of the month. So we say, look, for the amount of time that Reuven has already been there, we say, let him keep his money. For the other half of the month that he has not yet been in there, we say, well, Shimon has the chazaka that it's his property. So if Reuven while Reuven doesn't have to pay for what he's been there already, if he wants to continue to be there for the rest of the month, he will have to pay Shimon, I believe, sort of for the rest of the month. I think that's what it means by they split it, right? Meaning in that case, Reuven gets what he's been there already for free. He doesn't have to pay for that. But in terms of the remainder, if he wants to remain, then he will have to pay for the remainder of the month, which means that they end up basically splitting the month. So says the Gemara, Ushmuel says Shmuel, Beba be'emtza chodesh askinim. We're talking about where Reuven and Shimon showed up in Bezdin halfway through the month. So at that point, they say to split it. Aval ba b'tchilas chodesh. But if Shimon was on the ball, and they came at the beginning of the month to Bezdin, well then the halacha would be that it's Shimon's property, and Shimon has the right to be paid for his property. So Kula Lamaskir would all go to Shimon. But B'sof Chodesh, if they came at the end of the month, well then it's Reuven's money, right? He's been there all month. It's his money belongs to him, and we're not going to take it away from him. Kula L'socher, it'll belong to Reuven. Amar Shmuel lo aminu tfos lashon achron. But 1 second. So it sounds like Shmuel is not saying like Rav said. Rav says that we go tfos lashon achron. Rav says that we go based on what was said second, which in this case is 1 golden dinar per month. Shmuel does not seem to be saying that. He seems to be saying that we go based on chazakos, and we, and the reason why they split it is because they came to Bezdin halfway through the month. We don't say tfos lashon achron. He disagrees with Rav. But Rav Shmuel Amitabai. But I thought Rav and Shmuel agree. They both say kor b'shloshim ani mochelach. If somebody says, right, Shimon says to Reuven, I'm selling you a kor. A kor is 30 sa'ah. I'm selling you 30 sa'ah for 30 sellers. Okay? I'm selling you 30 sa'ahs for 30 sellers. So, or 1 kor for 30 sellers. And a kor is 30 sa'ah. So, Yachol lachzor bo, Shimon can renege afilu b'sa'ah achrona, even on the 30th sa'ah, even on the final sa'ah. But if he says kor b'shloshim, but if Shimon says a kor for 30 sellers, sa'ah b'sela, 1 sa'ah for a seller, 1 seller per sa'ah. So now it sounds like he's saying 2 separate things, right? First he says 30 for the kor, but then he says 1 seller per sa'ah. So ani mochelach, I'm selling to you. So Rishon kana. So then, as Ruvain purchases each sa'ah for 1 seller, it belongs to Ruvain, and Shimon can no longer renege. And as Ruvain purchases them, they belong to him. Shimon cannot renege. So it sounds like we're saying tfos lashon achron. It sounds like Rav and Shmuel are agreeing that tfos lashon achron. That since, even though he first had said 30 selah for the kor, but then he said 1 selah per sa'ah, so it sounds like we go based on that. And that is why when, as Ruvain purchases each sa'ah, they belong to him. Shimon cannot renege. So answers the Gemara, no, actually, Shmuel is saying the same exact thing with the kor, with this example. He's saying the same exact thing as he had said with the rental, with the golden dinar per month rental thing. Hasam time amai b'shum the toughest, that when it comes to, I think what it's saying is that by the hasam time amai b'shum the toughest, right? I think. Wait, what's the hasam and what's the hacha? Hasam. Yeah. Where am I? Hasam time. Yeah, I think Hasam is referring to the to the kor and the selah and the sa'ah. So therefore, when we say that Reuven, as he purchases each sa'ah for a seller, it belongs to him. It's not because we say tfos lashon achron. No, it's because now he has it. He has the chazaka achanami katafis. It's literally what he's saying. Also it's exactly what he said by the rental, right? With the month and the years. What did Shmuel say? He said that, well, if they would have come to Bezdin at the beginning of the 13th month, well then, Shimon has the chazaka that it's his property. If they come at the end of the 13th month, well then Reuven has the chazaka that it's his money and he doesn't have to pay. If it's halfway, well then Reuven keeps his money for what he's been there so far, but Shimon would get money for what's ahead. So we see that Shmuel is all about keeping things on the chazaka. So also in the case of a kor for 30 or each sa'ah for a selah, so the same thing. Once he already purchased it, it's his. He has it. So keep his money, right? Keep the sa'ah that he purchased. Keep his chazaka. Okay, fine. Rav Nachman says, Rav Nachman karka b'cheskas ba'alea kayemes. So Rav Nachman says that the property belongs to Shimon. The property belongs to Shimon. He deserves to be paid the golden dinar for it. Mike Mashmat tfos lashon achron. Hanu derav. What's Rav Nachman's chiddush that we say tfos lashon achron and it's 1 dinar per chodesh and Reuven needs to pay Shimon for that 13th month? Afalgav the apich mepach. No, but it's different than Rav. Rav says tfos lashon achron. Rav says that we always go based on what you said last. Now, in this particular case, the first thing that was said was 12 golden dinars for the year, and then he said 1 golden dinar per month. So Rav says, okay, Tfos Lashon Achron, and therefore Reuven needs to pay a golden dinar for that 13th month. But according to Rav, if it would have been fakert, if it would have been the opposite, if Shimon would have first said 1 golden dinar per month, 12 golden dinars for the year, well then Reuven would not have to pay Shimon for the 13th month. What Rav Nachman is saying is that the property belongs to Shimon and it's his chazaka. Reuven will always have to pay for that 13th month, regardless of what was said first and what was said second. Okay, fine. Well, this daf ended up being, I guess, a little bit slower than I thought it would be. But all right, I think things are going to pick up speed now, shtickle though. But we still have a lot to do. I want to get. We're like almost at the bottom of Kuf Beis and Beis. I want to get to the bottom of Kuf Gimel Mudalef, to the end of the parak, because it's gonna move. It's gonna move. I think it's gonna make sense, and then we could start with the next parak tomorrow. Bo minei Reb Yanai, they asked Reb Yanai, Socher Omar Nosati. If the renter says, I paid you the rent. Umasker Amar Lo Natati. But Shimon, the rentor, says, I didn't receive the rent. So Al Mila Biraya, who needs to bring proof? So Amos, when did this? When are we talking about? Well, if we're talking about during the time of the rental period, now of course the rent is only due at the end of the month. So if we're talking about during the month, we have a Mishnah to tell us what the halacha is. If we're talking about after the end of the month, we also have a Mishnah. Let's see, what does that mean? Titnan is written in a Mishnah in Bechoros. We got a while till we get to Bechoros. We got about probably like 3 years till Bechoros. Maybe a little bit less. So if you have a father and his firstborn son, if a father dies within the first 30 days of his firstborn son's life, so well, we assume that they had not yet done pidyon haben, because normally pidyon haben is done a month later. So if he died within the first month, we assume that he did not do pidyon haben. If the father died after 30 days into his firstborn son's life, so then so then we assume that he was redeemed, that they did do pidyon haben, unless there's proof brought otherwise. So say the same thing over here as well. By the rent, if we're talking about within the rental period, so assume that the rent was not yet paid. If we're talking about after the rental period, assume that the rent was paid. No, but we're talking about punkt on the day that the rent is due. So mi avid inish de par biyoma de mishalim zmane. Oh, lo, do we say that, right, do we assume that, well, maybe Reuven had already paid it in the morning, or not? We learned in I guess, Mishnah, or even maybe a Brisa, I don't know. We learned, Sochir bizmano nishba vinotel. That, when it comes to payday, right, so when it comes to payroll, so an employer, so if an employer has a bunch of employees and it comes to payroll and he needs to pay them, and one employee claims that he didn't get paid, so Socher Bismano, an employee on payment day, if he makes a claim that he didn't get paid, Nishba v'notel. So normally we say, right, Kol nishbayin v'lo mishalmin. Normally we say that you swear in order to so that you don't have to pay. We don't say swear and then collect payment. Yet there are certain exceptions. This is one exception. That in this case, the employee would swear that he did not get paid, and then he would be entitled to and then the employer would have to pay. So Sachiru diramu rabbanon shvua alis. We say specifically when a employee has a claim against his employer saying that he didn't get paid on that day, so the employee who's making the claim would swear, and then he can collect. Mishum, the Balabai is tarred before Yalav, because the assumption is, look, if the employer, it's payroll day and he's paying a lot of different people, he may think that he paid this person, but he accidentally paid somebody else. So therefore, we say that the employee swears that he did not get paid, and then he's entitled to get paid. Aval hacha, but over here, by the balabayis, by the landlord who's making a claim against the tenant, that he didn't receive payment, socher mehemen b'shvua, it would be the renter who would swear that he already paid and then he does not need to pay, right? So by the employer, so normally we say that the person who stands to pay would swear to get out of paying. We say specifically by an employee, it's the employee who swears and then he collects payment, but that would not apply, right? That's specifically by an employer who's got lots of, he's doing payroll and paying lots of different people, and he may have made a mistake and think that he paid, but he didn't. But over here, the tenant knows if he paid or not, and he can swear that he has in fact already paid, and then he would not have to pay. Okay. So now, if you want, you could turn off the daf right now. We're already on daf kuf gimel amud aleph, 4 lines into the amud. If you want, you could turn it off and pick it up tomorrow, and and then you'll just, we did kuf beis, and you could do kuf gimel tomorrow. But if you want to kind of keep at it, I imagine it shouldn't take much longer, and we will kind of push to the end of the parak. Again, I don't think it should take particularly long. Amarava says, Rav Nachman, Haiman de oger le beise lechavre leeser shnin. If Shimon rented his house to Ruvain for 10 years, v'chosav le shtare, and Shimon wrote a document and gave it to Ruvain, right, saying that my house is yours for the next 10 years. V'amar le, and then Shimon says, all right, Nikitas chomish shnin, you've already had it for 5 years, i.e. I've already, paid up, so to speak, or, granted you 5 of the 10 years. Mehemen, he's believed. But if that's the case, well then, ozve me'azuze b'shtar. What if Shimon lent Ruvain $1,000? Okay, so Ruvain borrows $1,000 from Shimon, and Ruvain writes a document saying that he borrowed $1,000 from Ruvain, and he gives this document. Ruvain writes a document saying that he borrowed $1,000 from Shimon. He gives the document to Shimon, and now Shimon has his document, and then Ruvain claims, by the way, I paid you back half of it. Right? This is the same thing, right? In this case, what's happening? Shimon is renting out his house to Ruvain for 10 years. He writes a document, gives it to Ruvain, saying that, my house is yours for 10 years. And then he claims, okay, you've had it, I've given it to you for 5 years already. And he's believed. We say Shimon's believed. So why is that any different than if Ruvain borrows $100 from Shimon? Ruvain then writes a document, gives it to Shimon, so that Shimon can collect the $100 back. And then Ruvain claims, okay, by the way, I paid you back 50. We wouldn't believe Ruvain. So why do we believe Shimon over here to say that, all right, you've already had the house for 5 years? So again, Amalei Rav Achim midifti levina, ela me'ata, osve mea zuze b'shtara, if Shimon lent Ruvain 100 zuz, and Ruvain wrote a document, they gave it to Shimon, and then Ruvain claims, Paraitich palga, I've already paid you back half of it. Should he be believed? Just like over here we're saying that we believe Shimon to say that Ruvain has already had the house for 5 years already. So the purpose of the shtar is different in these two cases. The purpose of a shtar in the case of a loan is to be able to collect with it. Shimon lent 100 zuz to Ruvain. Ruvain wrote a document saying that he borrowed that money and gave it to Shimon. Shimon has this document so that it can be claimed and repaid in full. And therefore, if Isa deploy, and if Ruvain did in fact pay back half of the loan, did in fact pay back 50 zuz, well then Ruvain knows that Shimon has this document that says that Shimon, is entitled to 100 zuz. Well then, he should have, right, Ruvain should have written on the document, like, by the way, I paid you half of it, and then they would sign on it, you should, make sure that it's documented that he did in fact pay back 50, so that it wouldn't be collected. He should ask for a receipt. And therefore, since he didn't, we can't just trust him that 50, that it was paid back, half of it was paid back. But over here, by the rental, where Shimon rented the field to Reuven for 10 years, and then he claims that Reuven's now already had it for 5 of the 10 years. Shimon says, the reason why I wrote for you a document is so that, part of it is so that, you have a documentation that it's yours for these 10 years, but also so that you wouldn't make a claim that it's your land, right? Rather you say, right, it's not your land, it's rented land. So the purpose of the document is different. It's not for you to be able to collect. It's also for me to be able to indicate that it's that it's my land and you're just renting it. So therefore, there wasn't any proof. We don't require the same amount of proof from Shimon. Rav Nachman says, Rav Nachman, Shoyel Adam betuvo leolam. It says Rav Nachman that if Ruvain sees that Shimon has an awesome axe or something, and he's like, yo, Shimon, that axe is awesome. I'd love to just borrow it forever. And as long as it's awesome, I want to be able to use it. And Shimon's like, all right, that's cool with me. Well, Ruvain now can just use it whenever he wants. So Amar of Mari bra devas Shmuel vudekani mine, but Shimon would have to make it official, and actually make a kinyan and show that he's serious about Reuven being able to take it whenever he wants. Amar of Mari de Rav Ashu Mahadale Kate, and if the so it belongs, so Reuven could borrow it whenever he wants, so long as it is still awesome. But if it breaks and it's no longer as awesome, well, Reuven doesn't own it. He's got to give back the pieces and the handle to Shimon. Rava says, Rav Ayman de Omar le lechavre. If Reuven says to Shimon, Oshlon mare lemirpak bay, Shimon, can you borrow me? Can you lend to me a hoe, because I want to do some digging. Lemirpak bay hai pardesa, because I want to dig in this particular orchard. Rafik bay au pardesa. Well, then he's only allowed to dig in that particular orchard. Pardesa, but if what Reuven said was, I want a hoe because I want to dig in a orchard, Rafik bay kol pardesa deboy. Well, then Reuven can dig any particular orchard that he wants. Pardese, and if he said orchards, Rafik fa'azul kol pardese de isle. Well, then Reuven can dig in all of the orchards that he has. Umahadele kate, and if it breaks, he returns the pieces to Shimon. Omar Rav Papa says, Papa Imando Omar le lechave oshlon hai gargusa. If Reuven says to Shimon, hey Shimon, can I use this particular well? Vinafla, and then the well, breaks, it falls. Lo banila, so Reuven can't repair it. Gargusa, if he says, can I borrow a well? Vinafla, and it fell. Banila, Reuven can fix it. Bei gargusa, if Reuven says, can I build a well? So Kariv Azul, he can dig around, Kama Garguse, he can dig around, and test for different spots. Be'are, in the land, Adam Sramile, until he finds a good place that's good for wells. But they would have to make a kinyan on that to make it official, so that he can actually do this digging around to build this, to find this well and build a well on Shimon's property. Says the final Mishnah in the Perek Asher L'Sapor, Hamasker Bayis L'Chavero, if Shimon rents out a house to Reuven v'Nofal and the house collapses, Chayiv La'amid Lo Bayis. Shimon needs to, rebuild. He's got to put it back together Shimon needs to put it back together for Reuven. Hayakayin Li'asenu Gadol. If it was a small house, he should not make it now a big house. If it was a big house, he shouldn't now make it a small house. If it was one house, Shimon should not now make it two houses. If it was two houses, he should not now make it one house. He shouldn't have less windows or more windows, unless they both agree on it. Says the Gemara, what are we talking about? Well, if the agreement was that Shimon was going to rent to Reuven this house, well, Nofal also lay. Well, if this house collapsed, it's gone. It no longer exists. It's gone. Shimon doesn't have to do anything. The house that they agreed upon is no longer. Either Amar le bayis stam, and if Shimon said, I will rent you a house, well, echad amar lo yasenu shnaim. Well, if it was one, why can't he make it two? Amar lo yasenu gadol. If it's small, why can't he make it big? I mean, all he committed was to a house. That was. So, initially he gave him this house that fell down. Okay, so I'll give you a different house. It's bigger, it's smaller, it doesn't matter. Rish Lakish says, Rish Lakish to Amar le bayis shani maskilach. Shimon says to Reuven, this house that I am renting to you, midas orko kach v'chach. It is these particular dimensions. Well, if that's the case, he has to build it in those particular dimensions. Well, then obviously, if he committed to a specific size and a specific amount of windows, well, of course, that's what he has to do. Rather, when Ravin came and said the name of Rish Lakish to Amar Le, that Shimon says to Reuven, Bayis kozeh ani maskilach, I am renting to you a house like this. So he has to, if it falls down, he has to rebuild it like this. But still, what's the chiddush? If he says like this, he has to keep it like this. So lotzricha dekoy aguda denaira. Well, it's talking about where the house is on it's a very picturesque next to a river. Maudetema my kozeh dekatoni aguda denaira. Maybe when it says like this, it means that it has to be on the river. So when he rebuilds it, he rebuilds on the river. Maybe it doesn't have to be the exact same size and everything. So kamash malan, yes, it does have to be the exact same size. We finished the 8th parak of Masechta BavaMetzia. We are now up to the 9th parak in the last big push in Masechta BavaMetzia, the Masechta that blew our minds, blew my mind. Wow, what did we talk about today? We talked about a lot of very interesting stuff today. We talked about the responsibilities of a rentor to a renter. We talked about whose responsibility is to put up the mezuzah, right? The renter has to put up the mezuzah. We got into the concept of that chatzer shel adam kornelo afilu shelo midaito, and then we got into tfos lashon rishon, tfos lashon achron, right? That if Shimon says that it's 12 golden dinars for the year, 1 golden dinar for the month, so Rav says we say tfos lashon achron, that we go based on what he says last. Shmuel says no, it's not based on what he says last. It's based on the chazakah, right? That Shimon has a chazakah that it's his property. Reuven has a chazakah that it's his money, and it depends, kind of like if Reuven's been living there, well, then he can keep onto his money. Keep his money. If he hasn't yet been living there, so then Shimon can keep his property and demand that he get paid to keep living there. Rav Nachman had said that it always belongs to. Shimon will always be entitled to get paid for his property. And then things just kind of like sped up there. At the end, we got into like some technical stuff at the end. All right, I'll catch you tomorrow for the beginning of Perek HaMekabel Soda Me Chavero. Peace out.